my focus is not on the private prison necessarily. I think, that's a problem. But even without that, like some of the worst prisons are state prisons. I mean, I think it causes a certain extra discomfort to be like, oh, now we're outsourcing this to corporations and involving the profit motive. Could that not doesn't that have the potential to make things worse, And I think, yeah, it does. But, the state-run system is already pretty bad, I mean, like it's not like, oh, if everything was state-run, it'd be great. No, I don't agree with that whatsoever. So my thing is more like, can we create a theoretical container that can understand any of these different permutations, like whether it's a state prison or a private prison or whatever is going on in terms of the labor, how do we characterize the labor process? The basic way I went about this is to say, slavery, or what I call the slave fundamental class process. I'm using a Marxist class analysis in order to understand this, So from the Marxist perspective, it's like, who performs the labor in society? That's like the key entry point, right? At a particular point of production, who produces surplus? And so surplus is defined by that which is above the needs of the direct producer. So the necessary surplus labor distinction. Now, in prisons, this is complicated because prisons involve welfare, right? Like the inmates receive a whole bundle of consumption goods regardless of whether they perform labor or not, right? So that's what we mean by welfare, right? Like it's a universal provision. And so
housing,
exactly.
Food, healthcare.
Exactly, right. And, this is pretty rare to find that in the United States, right? The forms of welfare that we have are fairly weak, right? I mean, we have like aid to families with dependent children, right? We have SNAP, we have Social Security, right? All of these are limited forms of welfare, right? But they're not necessarily all that comprehensive, right? I mean, like talk to somebody whose only income is Social Security, right? Like, are all of their needs met by that, right? I mean, it's certainly better than nothing, right? But prison has a very comprehensive form of welfare, and that has to be taken into account because the needs of the inmates, for food, clothing, shelter, and many other things are met, right? So,
and this is where I hate to cut you off, and let's table that point that you're making, because this is where I think a lot of the argument comes into play. As I was telling Dr. Bair off air, I was having a discussion with someone, family member, and they volunteer at a youth facility here in the Bay Area, and their point was there was some protesting going on in California. There's been people protesting the prison system. There's definitely been a lot of COVID problems with the way the wardens are handling everything. That's a whole nother topic for a whole nother show. And they've been calling for the release of a lot of prisoners. And also there's that whole ICE component where a lot of people are getting released, literally serving their time, and then going to another ICE facility, then getting kicked out of the country as a whole. The Guardian did a great piece on that. I can link that. But their point was that this youth facility for a lot of kids was better than home, quote unquote. Therefore, the youth facility is a good place. And I've also heard that argument for prison where usually you hear this from law enforcement. Well, these people are going to steal so they can go to jail and actually get a bed for the night or the month or whatever the situation may be. So to your point about welfare, quote unquote.
Yeah. to me, these are arguments for communism that I'm hearing. They're just in a very distorted form. Like, should we allow people to perish because they can't afford food? Should we allow people to sleep on the street because they can't afford rent? I mean, is that okay? Does a civilized society do that, right? I mean, I don't think so, honestly. I think it's pretty clear. Like, we have the wealth to give everyone the basics, right? We can give everyone a decent life, and why don't we? I mean, like let's ask the question that way. Let's not start with, okay, well, society is like this, and blah blah blah. Well, no, that's not a good place to start, right? Because the way that society is organized is absurdly cruel, right? We don't start there. We start with, what should it look like? I mean, that provides some clarity. And so, to me, like, the thinking that says, like, oh, yes, right, these people want to be incarcerated because then they get a hot meal. It's like, yeah, you're starting in the wrong place, and it's giving you a very distorted idea of things, right? Like, you're starting with the idea that, look, some people are just going to starve, right? Some people are just going to be homeless. I don't accept that as a starting point. I think that's a pointlessly cruel starting point. I think we could do a lot better than that.
To hear the rest of this show and more, you can find us at This Is Revolution Podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, SoundCloud, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. This is Revolution.